Hey guys, it's Ornlu, and as I've already talked about, in the upcoming mid-April update for AoE2 DE, we are getting 25 new castles for all of the different civilizations in the game. So if we break that down by the numbers, this means that every single civilization that was released before Lords of the West, so before Burgundians and Sicilians, will be getting an individually unique castle, plus the Athenians in the Chronicles. So that leaves a bunch of these castles that are currently shared between several different civilizations. They all need to be assigned to a specific civilization because, you're not getting completely new castles for every single civ. So that means that one civ is going to keep the current Western European castle, one civ is going to keep the current Central European castle, and so on and so forth. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and try and predict to see which civ gets the honor of keeping the existing castle, architecture set for all posterity, as the rest of their civ brethren are going to be getting a new castle. So obviously I'm just going to be guessing here based off of the designs and whatnot. So let's see what we can do here as we break down all of the different castle architecture sets, which are going to include the 8 shown on screen, plus the Southeast Asian one shared between Khmer, Burmese, and Malay, and the Central Asian one shared between Cumans and Tatars. So let's get into it. All right, so starting us off with the Western European castle, this is of course a classic Age of Kings castle that was initially added to the Britons, Franks, and Celts, was then given to the Spanish, which was then taken away, and then that's it. It's only available to now the original Age of Kings civs, the Britons, Franks, and Celts. So obviously it is going to be a castle from one of those 3 areas. This castle looks a lot like the Bodiam castle, I think it's called, in England, so I think this should be given to the Britons. It makes sense. Britons were the first civ that were added into Age of Empires. It would make sense that the regional castle for Western Europe would be based off of a British castle, or English castle, I suppose. And so I think this should be given to Britons, and then Celts and Franks should be given a new castle. Next up is going to be the Central European castle. This castle was, of course, another Age of Kings castle that was initially given to the Teutons, Goths, and Vikings, and was then later added to the Huns. So this one's kind of weird because I can't find a good castle that this is based on that's, I don't know, somewhere in Central Europe. So the closest I could find was a castle in Britain, but yeah, obviously that wouldn't make any sense. So reasonably speaking, obviously it was not originally designed as a Huns castle because the Huns weren't added at the time, so it means that it has to be with the Vikings, Teutons, or Goths. I think it's going to be with the Teutons, although I could easily be wrong here. One of the new castles that was sort of teased, I think, is a Vikings castle. I think it was Lithuanians at first, but it has a lot of the same wooden architecture at the top that is reminiscent of the Viking Wonder. So reasonably, that would leave us with Goths or Teutons. And I imagine Goths would be getting a castle that looks more like, more haphazard, less built up and grand like this castle. So I think it's going to be Teutons, could be Goths though. Next is going to be the East Asian castle. This castle was another Age of Kings castle and was initially added to the Japanese, Mongols, and Chinese, and then was later given to the Koreans, and then even later given to the Vietnamese. So this one feels like probably the easiest castle to identify. It's, I think, pretty clearly based off of the Osaka castle in Japan, so it would certainly make plenty of sense to give it to the Japanese civ, and then you can give Chinese and Koreans new castles in the DLC, and then Vietnamese as well. I'm sure, of course, there's going to be a lot of work put into those new castles, as that is going to be the focus of the upcoming expansion. That said, Old Castle almost certainly going to be sticking with the Japanese. Alright, moving on to the last Age of Kings castle, we now have the Middle Eastern architecture set castle, which was originally given to 4 civilizations, actually the most in Age of Kings, and it was given to the Saracens, Turks, Persians, and Byzantines. Byzantines later had that removed, and they got the Southern European architecture set, which we'll get to in a bit, and then it was added on to the Berbers with the African Kingdoms expansion, even before that. So of the civs that it was initially added with, it is almost certainly going to be the Saracens castle. It looks a lot like Saladin Citadel in Cairo, and of course Saracens are sort of the most identifiable, I think, of the Middle Eastern civs in the Age of Kings campaign. So I think, yeah, it would make a lot of sense for this to be the Saracen castle moving forward. Moving on now to castles that were added after Age of Kings, we have the one new architecture set from the Conquerors, which is of course the Central American architecture set, which was initially just for the Aztecs and Mayans, and then was later given to the Incas. Now, between Aztecs and Mayans, in which this castle would be initially designed. I think it looks a lot like Chichen Itza, which was one of the Mayan cities, and the castle looks a lot like that. I'll put a picture up on the screen, as I think I'll be doing with all of these. But yeah, it looks a lot like Chichen Itza, so I think that is going to be given to the Mayans, and then Aztecs would be getting a new castle, as well as the Incas. Incas, of course, not even in Central America, so their castle should probably look pretty distinct. Now we have the Forgotten expansion castle, sort of, which is, I think, going to be the Italians. This is the Southern European architecture set. This was initially based off of the castle from the Italians from the Forgotten mod. It was then later added to the Portuguese when that civ was added to the game. And then with DE, we had that also added to the Byzantines and the Spanish. However, this original castle design was based off of the one way back in the day for the Italians, so I think it would make a lot of sense that Italians themselves would be keeping this castle, and then that would be giving a new castle for all of the other Southern European civs. I mean, Southern European civs already have a lot of different civilizations, but a lot of them were also added in the more recent era. So I think this classic Mediterranean archetype castle will be sticking with the Italians. Also added with the Forgotten, we have the Eastern European castle. This was initially just for the Magyars and Slavs, but was then also later added with the launch of DE to the Bulgarians and Lithuanians. But of course, that means the initial design has to be either for Magyars or Slavs, so it's probably going to be given to one of those two civs, and of those two, I think it will be the Magyars. It looks a lot like the Magyar Wonder, and although in my research for this, this castle looks like a lot of castles all up and down sort of western Eastern Europe, if that makes sense, kind of, Poland, Hungary, that whole area. I think it looks more like what we'd see in that region than what we would see in like Russia and Ukraine, Belarus, that is more represented by the Slav civilization. So yeah, especially just based off of the similarities between the Magyar Wonder and the castle, I would have to be imagining that this is going to be going with the Magyars, and that we will be seeing new castles for Slavs, Lithuanians, and Bulgarians. Next, we have the African Kingdoms-based castle, which is only going to be for the Malians and Ethiopians, so here we are, a Sub-Saharan African castle just for two civilizations. So this is either going to be Malians or Ethiopians, but like most of the Sub-Saharan architecture set, it does seem to be more based off of West Africa and Mali, especially with a lot of the mud brick design. Remember that Ethiopians are also getting a new monastery in the next DLC, so I would imagine that Ethiopians are also going to be getting a new castle, and this existing Sub-Saharan African castle is going to be much more aligned with the Malians. All right, now moving on to Rise of the Rajas. This was, of course, another HD expansion, and added 4 new civilizations with the Southeast Asian architecture set, which were the Khmer, Burmese, and Malay. Vietnamese were also originally with this architecture set, but they were then switched over to the East Asian architecture set with DE. That said, this is another pretty clear example of, okay, this is a Khmer castle. It's based a lot on Angkor Wat, which is going to be one of the most significant buildings of the Khmer Empire. One of the new upcoming castles also looks a lot like a Burmese castle, based off of their wonder as well. So I think this is pretty clearly going to be going to Khmer, which would give both Burmese and Malay brand new castles. Alrighty, last but not least, for the more generic castle architecture sets, we have the Central Asian castles, which were added for the Tatars and Cumans with the launch of DE with the last Khans. In my opinion, this is another pretty clear-cut case. This castle is going to be going to the Tatars. The whole Central Asian architecture set is based off of Timurid architecture, the blue domes being especially notable in that regard. So yeah, it looks like a lot of architecture that we see in the, areas that were controlled by Timur and his empire. So this should be going to the Tatars, and Cumans, as the much more nomadic of the two civilizations, will probably be getting a castle that better reflects their nomadic lifestyle. So that is going to be it for this quick little video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Definitely let me know in the comments which civ is going to be keeping their classic castle architecture set. Of course, I could be wrong on all of these, but definitely let me know in the comments what you think. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.